Is it true that women in the medieval era, from about 500 AD to 1500 AD, were nothing more than helpless figures trapped in their homes with no voice, no rights, and no power? Was their entire existence defined by male authority, with no space for their own ambitions or contributions? Number one, women were passive victims in marriage and society. Many people picture medieval women as entirely without agency, forced into marriages they did not want, unable to escape difficult situations, and simply enduring whatever life threw at them. This picture often leaves out the complex realities of medieval marriage and social life, where women often played active roles in their own destinies and within their communities. And marriage in the Middle Ages was indeed a significant social and economic arrangement, often negotiated between families rather than being solely based on individual romantic love. However, this did not mean women had no say at all. For noble and wealthy families, a marriage alliance could secure land, power, or peace. Daughters became valuable pieces in these strategic puzzles. And yet, even in such high-stakes arrangements, a woman's consent, at least formally, was often required by canon law, the law of the church. While this consent might have been pressured, it was still a legal requirement. A woman could, in theory, refuse to say "I do," although the social consequences of such a refusal could be severe. Nevertheless, there are historical accounts of women who resisted unwanted unions, sometimes successfully finding an alternative or delaying the marriage. The church also developed specific rules around marriage, recognizing it as a sacrament. This meant that certain conditions had to be met for a marriage to be considered valid. One crucial aspect was free consent. If a marriage was found to have been coerced, it could be annulled. Annulment was not divorce, as we understand it today, which typically allows for remarriage after the dissolution of a marriage. An annulment declared that a marriage had never been valid in the first place, as if it had never happened. The grounds for annulment were varied and included lack of free consent, impotence, pre-existing marriage, or being too closely related by blood or marriage, known as consanguinity or affinity. While seeking an annulment was a complex and often costly legal process, requiring a petition to an ecclesiastical court and presentation of evidence, women did pursue them. Several cases can be found in court records across Europe where women argued that they had been forced into marriage, or that their husband was impotent, or that some other impediment made the marriage invalid. For a woman trapped in an unhappy or abusive marriage, an annulment offered a pathway to freedom and, importantly, the ability to remarry as if she had never been married before. This legal avenue, while not easily accessible to everyone, provided an escape hatch that contradicts the idea of complete helplessness. Beyond the formal legal structures of marriage and annulment, women also asserted their agency within their communities and daily lives. Medieval society was highly communal, and women were integral to the social fabric of villages, towns, and even castles. They participated in networks of kinship and friendship, supporting one another through childbirth, illness, and bereavement. Women often managed the household economy, which was not just about cooking and cleaning, but about producing goods for consumption and sale. This involved overseeing servants, managing supplies, and ensuring the smooth running of the domestic sphere, which was often a vital economic unit. In urban centers, women were active members of guilds, often as wives or widows of masters, but sometimes in their own right, engaging in charitable work, managing guild finances, and participating in guild feasts and processions. They contributed to the religious life of their communities, organizing devotions, participating in pilgrimages, and founding or supporting chantries and confraternities. These voluntary associations provided social support, spiritual solace, and sometimes even a degree of political influence within their local spheres. Women also held significant moral authority within their communities. As mothers, they were responsible for the religious and moral upbringing of their children. As elder women, they often served as sources of wisdom and guidance for younger generations. Their roles in rites of passage, such as births, marriages, and deaths, gave them a central place in the social ceremonies that marked the rhythm of medieval life. In instances of domestic conflict or community disputes, women might act as mediators, drawing on their networks and social standing to resolve issues peacefully. While patriarchal norms were certainly prevalent, the lived experience of medieval women was far from one of absolute passivity. They negotiated, resisted, adapted, and shaped their lives and their communities in numerous ways, often within the constraints of their time, but rarely as mere objects of circumstance. Their social contributions, legal avenues, and personal acts of defiance paint a picture of women who, despite facing challenges, actively engaged with and influenced the world around them. The idea of total passivity simply does not hold up against the rich evidence of their daily lives and societal roles. Number 2, women were uneducated and illiterate. A common perception of the Middle Ages suggests that education was a privilege reserved almost exclusively for men, particularly clergy and the sons of the elite. This view often paints medieval women as broadly illiterate, confined to domestic skills, and lacking any intellectual engagement. However, historical evidence shows a much more nuanced reality, revealing that many women across different social strata and regions did indeed receive education, sometimes of a very high standard, and engaged deeply with texts and intellectual pursuits. While formal schooling as we understand it today was not widespread for anyone, education took many forms, and women participated in several of them. One of the most significant centers of female education was the convent. For women who chose a religious life, or whose families chose it for them, convents provided a structured environment for learning. Nuns were taught to read, primarily to access religious texts such as the Bible, psalters, and prayer books, but also to study the lives of saints and theological works. Beyond basic literacy, many convents became hubs of scholarship and artistic production. Nuns often learned to write, copy manuscripts, and even illuminate them, creating beautiful and valuable books. They engaged in theological debate, composed hymns and treatises, and managed extensive libraries. For example, Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess in the 12th century, was a prolific writer, composer, philosopher, mystic, and polymath. She wrote theological, botanical, and medicinal texts, as well as letters and songs. Her works show a profound and systematic knowledge that could only have come from extensive education and intellectual engagement within her monastic setting. Convents also served as schools for noble girls who might not eventually become nuns. These young women learned reading, writing, Latin, arithmetic, music, and sometimes practical skills like herbal medicine or estate management, preparing them for their future roles, whether as wives, mothers, or heads of households. Beyond the cloister, noble women in secular society often received education within their own homes or through tutors. The daughters of kings, dukes, and counts were trained not only in household management and social graces, but also in reading, writing, and sometimes even languages, history, and rhetoric. This education was considered essential for their roles in managing large estates, engaging in diplomatic correspondence, and influencing their husbands and sons. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the 12th century, was known for her intelligence, her patronage of troubadours and poets, and her active involvement in politics. Her ability to navigate complex political landscapes suggests a sophisticated understanding of the world, nurtured by an education that extended far beyond simple domesticity. Other noble women, like Christine de Pizan, a writer in late 14th and early 15th century France, were not only educated but became professional intellectuals. Christine de Pizan wrote numerous works of poetry, prose, and history, arguing for women's capabilities and against misogynistic stereotypes. Her very existence and success as a writer challenged the notion of widespread female illiteracy and intellectual stagnation. For women of the merchant and artisan classes in towns, literacy, especially numeracy, was often a practical necessity. Women who ran shops, managed taverns, or participated in trade needed to be able to keep accounts, write receipts, and understand contracts. While their education might not have involved classical Latin or theological treatises, it was a functional literacy that enabled them to participate actively in the urban economy. Guilds often had provisions for the education of the wives and daughters of master craftsmen, ensuring they could assist in the family business. There's evidence of women acting as scribes, notaries, and even medical practitioners, all professions that required literacy and specialized knowledge. Even in rural areas, while formal education was rare for both men and women, practical knowledge was passed down through generations. Women were often custodians of traditional medicine, folklore, and agricultural wisdom, skills that were vital for survival and community well-being. This knowledge, though not always text-based, constituted a significant form of intellectual capital. The idea that medieval women were universally uneducated or illiterate is a simplification. While opportunities varied greatly by social class, geography, and individual circumstances, a significant number of women across the medieval period received substantial education, became literate, and engaged in intellectual and artistic pursuits, fundamentally shaping the cultural and economic landscape of their times. Number 3, women had no political power or influence. The image of medieval society often places men firmly in control of all political and public life, with women relegated to the private sphere, devoid of any real say in governance or diplomacy. This perspective overlooks the significant political power and influence wielded by many medieval women, not only through informal channels, but often through formal positions of authority. While women rarely held direct political office in the same way as kings or lords, their roles as queens, regents, noblewomen, and abbesses gave them immense power within the feudal system and beyond. And queens, for instance, were far from mere ceremonial figures. They were often crucial partners in governance, especially when their husbands were absent on military campaigns, pilgrimages, or diplomatic missions. During such times, queens frequently acted as regents, governing in their husband's name, issuing charters, collecting taxes, commanding armies, and administering justice. Matilda of Flanders, wife of William the Conqueror, ruled England as regent while William was away, overseeing the kingdom with competence and authority. Eleanor of Aquitaine, an extraordinary example, was not just a queen of France and then England, but a powerful feudal lord in her own right, controlling vast territories in southwestern France. She led armies, negotiated treaties, and actively participated in the political intrigues of her time, even enduring imprisonment for her defiance. Blanche of Castile, regent for her son Louis IX of France, successfully navigated a period of intense political unrest and rebellion, demonstrating formidable political skill and resolve in securing the throne for her young son. These women were not just figureheads, they were active rulers who made decisions that shaped the course of kingdoms. As noblewomen, even if not queens, also held considerable political sway. As mistresses of castles and estates, they were often responsible for managing vast lands, overseeing tenants, collecting rents, and administering justice in their husband's absence or after his death as a widow. A widowed noblewoman, often with control over her dower lands, could be a significant landowner and therefore a powerful political actor in her own right. She could participate in feudal courts, form alliances, and even raise military levies from her lands. These women engaged in the complex web of feudal relationships, wielding influence through their networks of kinship, vassalage, and patronage. They could mediate disputes between powerful lords, arrange strategic marriages for their children, and act as diplomatic agents, carrying messages and negotiating agreements between warring factions. Their social position, family connections, and control over resources often translated directly into political power. The religious women, particularly abbesses of powerful monastic houses, also exercised significant political and economic authority. Many abbeys were vast landowners, holding feudal rights over villages and towns, collecting tithes and even controlling courts. An abbess was the spiritual and temporal head of her community, responsible for its finances, administration, and interactions with secular powers. For example, the Abbess of Quedlinburg in Germany was a powerful imperial princess holding direct allegiance to the Holy Roman Emperor, with control over a large territory and a seat in the imperial diet, the empire's legislative body. These abbesses were not just religious leaders, they were powerful feudal lords, engaging in diplomacy, managing resources, and wielding considerable influence in regional politics. They negotiated with kings and bishops, defended their land rights, and governed hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people. Beyond formal roles, women also exerted influence through their roles as advisors, patrons, and cultural arbiters. Highly educated and intelligent women could be trusted confidantes to kings and popes, offering counsel and shaping policy behind the scenes. Their patronage of arts, literature, and learning helped to shape cultural trends and intellectual movements. The troubadour poetry, for example, flourished in courts where noblewomen were patrons, fostering a culture of chivalry and courtly love that had social and political implications. The idea that women were excluded from politics is a simplification. While the forms of power might have differed from those of men, medieval women were undeniably active participants in the political landscape, influencing decisions, managing territories, and shaping the destiny of their societies in profound and measurable ways. Their contributions were integral to the functioning of medieval governance and society. Number 4. Women could not work or have professions. The popular image of medieval women often limits their work to the domestic sphere, focusing on spinning, weaving, cooking, and child-rearing within the confines of their homes. This narrow view ignores the vast and diverse range of economic activities that medieval women engaged in, often working alongside men or independently, contributing significantly to their household incomes and the broader economy. Across all social classes, women were vital to the economic life of medieval Europe, demonstrating remarkable versatility and skill in numerous professions. In rural areas, where the majority of the population lived, peasant women were indispensable to agricultural production. Their work was not merely helping out, but was integral to the survival of the family and the feudal manor. They participated in every stage of farming, planting seeds, weeding fields, harvesting crops, and tending to livestock such as pigs, chickens, and cows. They milked animals, made cheese and butter, and processed agricultural products for storage and sale. The women were also responsible for managing the garden, which often provided crucial dietary supplements and medicinal herbs. Beyond the fields, they were heavily involved in textile production, from shearing wool to spinning yarn and weaving cloth, often producing textiles for both family use and for sale at market. This work was physically demanding and continuous, directly contributing to the economic output and sustenance of the household. In medieval towns and cities, women were active in a wide variety of trades and crafts. Many urban women worked alongside their husbands in family businesses, learning the trade and contributing their labor and expertise. In many guilds, the wife of a master craftsman was considered an unofficial partner in the business. If her husband died, the widow often had the right to continue the business, becoming a master in her own right, inheriting the workshop, tools, and the right to train apprentices. This meant women could run bakeries, breweries, butcher shops, tailor shops, and various other craft businesses. Women were particularly dominant in the brewing industry, with wives being a common sight in medieval towns, producing and selling ale in their homes or in small taverns. They also worked as bakers, selling bread in markets. In the textile industry, women were central, particularly in spinning and weaving. The word spinster itself originally referred to a woman who spun, highlighting a common female occupation. Beyond family businesses, many women pursued independent professions. They worked as shopkeepers, selling goods like pottery, candles, or cloth. They were also active as merchants, traveling to fairs and markets to buy and sell goods. Some women were innkeepers, running taverns and providing hospitality to travelers. In the medical field, women served as midwives, nurses, and herbalists, providing essential healthcare services, particularly for women and children. There were also women scribes, illuminators, and bookbinders contributing to the production of books and manuscripts, often within convents, but also in secular workshops. In port cities, women engaged in fishing and fishmongering, buying and selling seafood. In some areas, women even worked in mining. The economic records of medieval towns, such as tax rolls, guild registers, and court documents, frequently show women listed as taxpayers, property owners, and active participants in commercial transactions. They borrowed and lent money, signed contracts, and engaged in litigation related to their businesses. This widespread economic activity demonstrates that medieval women were not confined to domestic chores, but were essential, visible, and often independent economic agents. Their labor was crucial to the functioning of medieval society and economy, supporting their families and contributing significantly to the prosperity of their communities. The idea that women simply stayed at home without professions is a significant misunderstanding of the dynamic and diverse world of medieval work. Number 5, women could not own property. A prevalent myth suggests that medieval women were entirely dependent on male relatives for their economic existence, possessing no property rights of their own. This idea paints a picture of women as legally invisible in matters of land and wealth. However, historical records across medieval Europe reveal a much more complex and varied reality, where women, under different legal systems and social circumstances, were often able to own, inherit, manage, and even dispose of property, both real estate and movable goods. The extent of these rights varied by region, social class, and marital status, but they were far from non-existent. One of the most significant property rights for medieval women, particularly widows, was the dower. Dower was the portion of a deceased husband's property, typically 1/3 of his lands and goods, that was set aside for his widow's support. This was not a gift, but a legal right, ensuring the widow's economic security for the rest of her life or until her remarriage. The dower lands, often substantial, gave the widow direct control over an estate, its tenants, and its revenues. She could manage the land, collect rents, and in some cases even administer justice on her dower lands. This meant a widow could be a significant landowner in her own right, wielding economic power and influence in her local community. Examples of powerful dowager countesses and duchesses managing vast territories are abundant in medieval history, but even common women could exercise control over smaller plots of land or property through dower. Beyond dower, women could inherit property. In many regions, particularly where customary law rather than strict feudal law prevailed, daughters could inherit land in the absence of male heirs, or sometimes even alongside them. While primogeniture, the inheritance by the eldest son, became dominant for feudal tenures in some areas, especially for noble titles and major estates, it was not universal. In parts of Europe, such as northern France or Scandinavia, partible inheritance was common, meaning land was divided among all children, including daughters. even where primogeniture was the norm. If there were no sons, a daughter or a group of daughters could inherit an entire estate, becoming heiresses who brought substantial property into a marriage or managed it themselves if unmarried. These heiresses were highly sought after in the marriage market, precisely because of the property they brought, demonstrating the value placed on their potential ownership. Furthermore, women often had control over their dowry, which was the property or wealth that a bride brought to her marriage. While the dowry was initially given to the husband to support the household, its ultimate ownership often remained with the wife. If the marriage ended in divorce, annulment, or the husband's death, the dowry was usually returned to the wife or her family. This control over the dowry gave women a degree of financial independence and security. It was a tangible asset that could be used for their support or, in some cases, to invest in businesses or other ventures. For urban women, their dowry might consist of money, goods, or even a house, giving them a significant economic footing. Women also engaged in property transactions. Clear records show women buying, selling, mortgaging, and leasing land and other property, sometimes with their husband's consent, but often independently, especially if they were widows or single. A woman who owned a shop or a house in a town would pay taxes on it, enter into contracts related to it, and have legal standing to defend her ownership in court. This indicates a clear recognition of their property rights by the legal system. In many towns, married women, particularly those involved in trade, could operate as femmes sole merchants, a legal status that allowed them to conduct business and incur debts independently of their husbands, implying control over their business assets. The idea that medieval women could not own property is therefore a sweeping generalization that obscures a much more diverse legal and economic landscape. While their rights might have been different from men's and subject to certain limitations, women across the social spectrum frequently owned, inherited, and managed substantial property, giving them economic leverage and a recognized place within the medieval legal and social order. Their engagement with property was a fundamental aspect of their lives, providing security, status, and sometimes considerable power. Number 6. Women had no legal rights or standing. The common belief that medieval women possessed no legal rights is a sweeping statement that simplifies a complex legal landscape. While the legal systems of the Middle Ages were certainly patriarchal in many aspects and varied widely across different regions and time periods, medieval women were far from entirely devoid of legal standing or protections. They had rights regarding property, marriage, inheritance, and even the ability to engage in legal proceedings, demonstrating a recognized, albeit sometimes limited, presence within the medieval legal framework. One fundamental area where women had recognized legal rights was in marriage and its dissolution. As previously noted, canon law, the law of the church, required the free consent of both parties for a valid marriage. If this consent was proven to be lacking, or if other impediments existed, a woman could petition for an annulment. While challenging, this process allowed women to escape marriages that were not legally binding or were deeply problematic. Furthermore, a woman's right to her dowry, the property she brought into the marriage, was often protected by law. Upon her husband's death, or an annulment, the dowry was generally returned to her, providing a crucial source of financial security. Similarly, the right to dower, a widow's claim to a portion of her deceased husband's estate for her lifetime, was a powerful legal entitlement, ensuring her support and often giving her direct control over significant lands and resources. In matters of property and inheritance, women's legal standing varied. While primogeniture, the inheritance by the eldest son, was common for major feudal holdings in some areas, it was not universal. In many regions, and particularly for non-noble families, daughters could inherit property, either in the absence of sons or alongside them. If there were no male heirs, daughters were often the legal inheritors of estates, bringing wealth and status to their marriages or managing the properties themselves. For movable goods, such as household items, money, and personal effects, women often had considerable control. Wills and testaments from the period frequently show women bequeathing their own property, demonstrating their right to possess and dispose of personal wealth. Women also had the right to appear in court, both as plaintiffs and defendants. The legal records from medieval England, France, Italy, and other regions show numerous instances of women engaging in legal disputes. They sued for debt, defended their property rights, sought justice for grievances, and even initiated criminal complaints. For example, court rolls reveal peasant women suing neighbors over land boundaries, urban women pursuing legal action against debtors, and noble women defending their territorial claims. While a married woman often had to appear in court with her husband, especially in common law systems, this was not always the case, particularly for women involved in trade. In many towns, a married woman who was a femme sole merchant could conduct business independently and was held legally responsible for her own debts and contracts, meaning she could sue or be sued in her own name. Beyond civil matters, women also had a recognized standing in criminal law, both as victims and, less frequently, as perpetrators. They could bring charges against those who wronged them, for instance, in cases of violence or theft. While the justice system of the Middle Ages was often harsh and uneven, women were not entirely outside its protections or processes. They presented evidence, gave testimony, and sought redress through formal legal channels. Even in monastic communities, abbesses held significant legal authority, often administering justice within their own monastic lands and engaging in legal battles to defend their rights and property against secular lords or rival religious houses. Their ability to manage these complex legal affairs demonstrates a high degree of legal knowledge and active participation in the legal system. The nuanced truth is that medieval women, while operating within a legal framework that was often patriarchal, possessed and exercised a range of legal rights and protections, allowing them to participate in and defend their interests within the society in which they lived. Number 7. Women were confined to the home and domestic duties. The image of a medieval woman confined to the inner sanctum of her home, endlessly spinning, weaving, and tending to children is deeply ingrained in popular imagination. This limited view often neglects the vibrant and extensive participation of women in the broader economic and social life of the Middle Ages. In reality, medieval women, regardless of their social standing, were frequently active outside the domestic sphere, engaging in essential labor, trade, and community activities that took them far beyond the household walls. Their contributions were vital to the functioning of medieval society and economy, demonstrating a much more dynamic and public existence than the myth suggests. For the vast majority of the population who were peasants living in rural areas, the idea of a woman being confined to the home was simply unfeasible. Survival depended on the collective labor of the entire family unit. Peasant women worked tirelessly in the fields, alongside men, performing heavy agricultural tasks. They participated in plowing, sowing seeds, weeding, and harvesting crops like grain and hay. They were responsible for tending to livestock, milking cows, churning butter, making cheese, caring for chickens, pigs, and sheep. Women also often managed the kitchen garden, which provided vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants crucial for the family's sustenance and health. They would walk to the communal oven to bake bread, gather firewood from the forest, and fetch water from wells or rivers. The work of a peasant woman was physically demanding, often outdoors, and deeply integrated into the agricultural cycle of the year. This was not merely domestic labor in the modern sense, it was fundamental economic production that sustained life itself. In medieval towns and cities, women were equally active in the public sphere of work and commerce, while urban women were integral to the bustling economy of guilds, markets, and shops. Many women operated their own businesses or worked alongside their husbands in family enterprises. They were commonly found running taverns and breweries, as the production and sale of ale was a prominent female occupation. Alewives were a familiar sight, brewing and selling their products from their homes or dedicated establishments. Women also worked as bakers, selling bread from their shops or market stalls. They were active in the textile industry, not only spinning and weaving at home, but also working in workshops as carders, dyers, and finishers, producing cloth for sale. Marketplaces were vibrant centers of female economic activity, with women selling a variety of goods, including poultry, eggs, dairy products, vegetables, and crafts. They were also shopkeepers, running small stores, selling everything from candles to cloth. Beyond these common trades, women engaged in a surprising array of specialized professions. Records show women working as scribes, particularly within convents, but also in secular contexts, copying and illuminating manuscripts. Some women were skilled apothecaries, preparing and selling medicines. Others worked as laundresses, seamstresses, or nurses, providing essential services to the community. In ports and coastal towns, women were involved in the fishing industry, either selling fish at market or preparing nets and processing the catch. These professions often required specialized skills, interactions with customers and suppliers, and a significant amount of time spent outside the home in public spaces of work and commerce. Even noblewomen, while having more domestic staff, were not entirely confined. They managed vast households, which were often complex economic and administrative units. This involved overseeing servants, managing supplies, maintaining records, and hosting guests, all of which required considerable organizational skill and often interaction with a wider network of suppliers and tenants. When their husbands were away at war, on pilgrimage, or serving the king, noblewomen often took on the full management of the estate, including collecting rents, administering justice, and overseeing military affairs, which required them to travel, meet with vassals, and engage publicly with their tenants and neighbors. Religious women, such as abbesses and nuns, lived and worked within their convents, but these institutions were often large economic and social entities, owning land, managing resources, and interacting with the surrounding communities. Nuns engaged in spiritual activities, but also managed farms, produced goods, and provided education and health care to the local population. The sheer diversity of women's work and their constant presence in public spaces, from fields to markets to workshops, fundamentally challenges the myth of their universal confinement to the home. Medieval women were active, visible, and indispensable participants in the economic and social life of their time.